I advise you to go into this essay with an open mind and to try and understand my point as much as possible instead of leaving immediately. The following might sound like patronizing, and I don't mean it in that way, but please take a moment to think about why this topic irritates you so much, if it does, and that perhaps it should simply be a discussion like any other. I really think it's a worthwhile debate to have, which delves into some very interesting aspects of video games. In this essay, I'm going to be looking at every single major argument I'm aware of when it comes to the assist mode discussion in gaming, specifically around the titles of From Software, since that's where the controversy is usually at. I will be talking about games as a whole, however. You shouldn't look at this as a way of strawmanning those that are anti-assist mode, arguing against opinions they don't hold, but rather one of steelmanning, trying to empower the other side as much as possible before engaging with it. I will be replying to some not so sound arguments, but only in an attempt to reply to all of them. I will also speak on the practical designing of assist modes. Firstly, I believe it's best to start with the things I won't be arguing for, some of which might even be coming from people on my side. Number 1, that studios should be mandated to add an assist mode if they can. This isn't something I stand behind. Instead, I will simply be stating why I believe an assist mode would be a good thing and not the devil most people make it out to be. And usually we like it when artists do these good things. We like subtitles in our games, we like colorblind modes, etc. if they can be added, if they have the extra budget. We don't force them to, and if they don't do it, we don't berate them for it, since a lot of games don't do it either. But when one does, and it does it well, it's a great addition. Of course, these things take time and resources, I understand that, although it's way less than most people imagine. We will be speaking more about that later. Number 2, people also mention that fans can provide assist modes sometimes when the developers don't, and obviously, if that is true for a game and it was executed well, then sure, we don't need an official one. If the studio also somehow knew that a modder was out there willing to do the job when the game gets released, it would be the same thing. That is still kind of odd, however, and they can't know for sure if it would be good enough. You wouldn't want people ruining their experience on release with subpar mods that just give you invincibility. Either way, the mods only apply to PC, so if the game is also on console, it doesn't stand. Number 3, I also won't be arguing that my form of assist mode be present in multiplayer games or any multiplayer aspects of otherwise single player games, such as in Dark Souls or Elden Ring. Accessibility for multiplayer games is an entirely different discussion and something many other people have talked about. My argument will revolve around accessibility for single player games, although I will mention briefly the problems that arise with those multiplayer aspects when we get to the designing of assist modes. Finally, I should mention that I've had an amazing time with FromSoft's titles, if that counts for anything. I finished Dark Souls 3 and Sekiro both 7 times, and they're some of my favorite games ever made. In no way did I get them out of the way so I can write my hit piece about how terrible FromSoft are or something of that sort. I don't want an assist mode for me. It really doesn't affect me at all. I actually thought a true hard mode for the games of FromSoft was very much overdue. New Game Plus is alright, but it cannot in any way match up to what Sekiro did. It helped a lot with making replays actually worth it. If there is one studio that I would trust were they to say their next game is going to be a masterpiece, it'd probably be From Software. It's only natural that we start with this part of the discussion. Who are these assist modes even for, and why? The answer is people with certain disabilities. That does not include disabilities that can be held by adaptive controllers, but rather those that affect your reaction time, timing, and sense of rhythm. One example being dyspraxia that can prevent you from beating difficult games, no matter how much you try and get good at them. One of the most common arguments that follows this statement is, stop speaking for disabled people. That is not what I'm doing. Disabled people themselves have come out saying they want an assist mode. Others have come out saying we shouldn't give them one because it would ruin the game. I disagree with the latter, and so I respond. Another common argument is FromSoft games do not actually require any of that, it's all about knowledge. That isn't quite true. While knowledge is, in my opinion, a bigger part of it, it's not the only part. These games still require skill that some might not have in them. A, you need to react fast enough to what kind of attack gets thrown at you and respond accordingly, which is blatantly about reaction time. And B, Sekiro is a game all about rhythm and timing, and even Souls and Elden Ring require it when you start rolling a boss's combos. I would agree that FromSoft games aren't quite as hard as people make them out to be, and that, indeed, they do undoubtedly have maybe not easy modes, but definitely easier modes, with certain builds in Dark Souls and Elden Ring, or keeping Curse Charm and not ringing the Demon Bell in Sekiro. But it's still not enough for some. Others tend to state stuff such as, here is a disabled person that beat Sekiro. That says nothing, as there is a great number of disabilities and each one has varying severities. Disabled is an umbrella term, and comparing two people without mentioning anything about their disabilities is a useless statement. The final argument of this group is, you want disabled people to have an easier time than everyone else. That's ableist. No, that's not what I'm saying. If every single disabled person could beat the game, then I wouldn't want an assist mode. It isn't about making it easier, it's about making it possible at all. Don't think of it as an easy mode, think of it as an accessibility feature, an assist mode. It's what it is. It's so people can have access to the game if they cannot get good enough. We don't want to remove the challenge for them, we want them to be able to experience the challenge in the first place. That last sentence makes sense because difficulty is relative. This is a very simple concept that many people seem not to understand. Take a random non-disabled person, let's call them person 1, and someone with a severe disability that affects the things I listed, person 2. Now let's assume that they are equal in everything that is unaffected by person 2's disability, say intellect, eyesight, etc. And let's also assume that they both train until they get as good as they can possibly be. Person 2 will not be as good as person 1. Their skill cap, how good they can get before they cannot get any better, will be less than X, whilst that of person 1 is simply X. If a boss or other encounter requires the skill of X at least, not saying that any boss would require that much skill, is just an example, then person 1 will barely beat it, whilst person 2 won't. And yet, if the difficulty were to be lowered, perhaps not that much, perhaps a lot, they will also barely beat it. They will have that same soul-crushing FromSoft experience of learning from your mistakes, adapting, observing your surroundings, and reacting accordingly. They will experience the same harsh and unforgiving world. It doesn't ruin the experience, it gives the same experience. If you want everyone to experience the artist's vision, you should be arguing for assist modes. That's a shared emotional experience though. If you were to start discussing balance and mechanics with somebody, you'd obviously expect most people who played with assist mode to preface their statements with, "I didn't actually beat the boss on the intended difficulty, but here's how I felt about it anyway," before proceeding to make their statement. Some are concerned that journalists will hide what difficulty they play on or lie about it, but if someone reviewing a game hides as important a fact as that, they probably aren't a great journalist and you shouldn't read their articles in the first place. And that's not a very sensible issue in my opinion. Accessibility is way more important to me than game journalists. But what about the actual communities? Could they possibly be ruined by this problem somehow? There is this worry that having one person say they beat a game but it was with assist mode and another did the same but it on the intended difficulty will cause problems. In reality, like we explained, that's rather easy to manage. Just say I beat X game and you add with assist mode at the end. When you think about it, Dark Souls is actually really terrible at that. Some weapons like the Black Knight Halberd in Dark Souls 1 and the Sellsword Twin Blades in 3 trivialize the games a ton, but many people don't disclose that when they say they beat them, since that would be rather odd. And if the communities were to be ruined a little, which they don't seem to be with other harsh titles that implement assist mode, such as Pathologic, Celeste, Darkest Dungeon, etc., I would be fine with that if it meant extra accessibility. Continuing, games aren't for everyone. Nothing is. That is an absurd statement to throw out when talking about accessibility. If we were speaking about enjoyment, I would obviously agree with you. If you don't like fantasy, we don't replace it with realism to make it enjoyable for you. If you don't like horror, we don't make it less scary to make you like it. Trying to expand the fan base by taking a less niche approach to story, setting, mechanics, etc., and thus perhaps ruining the quality of said game is an ignorant mistake. However, that doesn't make sense for accessibility. Nobody reasonable responds with "things aren't for everyone" when someone asks for a colorblind mode, subtitles, even something like a wheelchair ramp to speak about real life. We don't not add these things for no reason. If you wanted to argue against them, you need to provide an actual justification as to how they may majorly hurt the game. Some also say that not having an assist mode creates a niche fan base at first, and in the long run a great and big fan base. But once again, this is not valid when it comes to accessibility. The following might sound like trying to reach out to someone's feelings to get them to agree, but please listen to the following sentence. Making the game not have an assist mode and thus reducing accessibility for disabled people is fine, because at the end of the day it makes the game more popular in the long run due to people talking about its difficulty. First off, I'm not sure if I would agree immediately that that would be the case. They likely would have named it cheat mode back in the day if they were to implement the same type of accessibility mode I was speaking of, and perhaps that wouldn't have truly diminished the game's reputation. But either way, I would think almost no one would be fine with a company doing something they don't agree with just because it could boost their sales. Again, I'm not advocating for a mandate, but I don't agree that it's okay to exclude disabled people just so you could boost your sales a bunch, which these days I don't even think would work, rather the opposite. And if it was added, most people that are against it would think, so they have finally caved in because of the pressure. The game is probably still good though. Overall, it's similar to our last point. Achieving a niche community is a great thing in a purely communicative sense and in a business sense and others. But doing it through excluding, say, people who hate hard games or people who hate disturbing games is way different than doing it by excluding disabled people, even if that excluding is obviously not intentional or spiteful in any way. Another argument that people throw out is we can't make everything accessible to everybody. That's an obvious observation and it doesn't contradict my position in any way. Someone that cannot beat the game even with the sliders all the way down probably wouldn't enjoy it much anyway. But even still, because we cannot reach perfection doesn't mean we shouldn't strive towards it. No one sane person disagrees with this if they think about it. We cannot eliminate all crime or all hunger and prejudice either, and yet we still try. Would you call those fruitless endeavors? It is time we got to the practical designing of assist modes. The first major thing to consider is temptation. Many people are tempted to use subtitles even if they can hear perfectly fine, and it will undoubtedly ruin their experience to an extent. This is something I believe very strongly in, but that's a topic for another time. The point here is that subtitles also grant accessibility and assist mode is much the same. Some that may not need them will choose them and it will ruin their experience. But it doesn't mean we need to compromise the idea. Look at it this way. On one hand, if we add the assist mode, we now have people that just choose to start their game with it instead of with standard mode. They can beat it, but they're simply too afraid of the challenge the game might offer. It's purely their fault. On the other hand, we don't add an assist mode and now we have people that cannot beat the game. They really want to play it, but they can't. One is a person that somewhat, not even completely, worsens their experience of their own choice. The other person has no choice. And even when talking about actually playing the games at all, sure, some people would not even buy them because they have an assist mode, though I doubt it would be much since only a hardcore fan of FromSoft would be offended by the mode and even think about doing that, which means they wouldn't do it because they're a hardcore FromSoft fan. Either way, others would also jump in. Again, for those who live, it's a choice. For the others, it wasn't before. However, going back to that temptation, it's still a valid concern. We need to make sure as few people as possible that don't need it end up choosing it. That's done through communication, letting the player know what they're getting into when they choose assist mode. This is what it should look like. You click new game and are presented with a choice to turn off the standard mode or even the true experience or intended experience and choose assist mode. Upon clicking it, it says, turning this off will allow you to toy with the game's mechanics. This is not how the game is meant to be played. However, we understand that there are people out there who need these options to play the game. It's ultimately your call, but we would advise against it if it isn't mandatory. We've put a ton of care into tailoring our intended experience for you, and it should be beatable by most, even though it doesn't seem like that at first. This is a better decision than simply putting the assist mode option in the settings, since that way anyone can access it at any point in time. They are tempted to do it. But like this, if you didn't choose it in the start, you cannot access it. And in no circumstance, under no conditions, should it be called easy mode. That makes it sound like it's making it easier for people who can actually beat it. It sounds like the classic easy modes that we already know of, which is not the case. It's both not true to the intent of the mode and might also be more tempting for some. Assist mode is perfect. Some also prefer eco mode or even accessibility mode, though that's a mouthful. And now there is of course the question, what will this assist mode look like? We might be able to show why an assist mode would be fine, but would we actually be able to make it work? Balance is a most common concern, and yet it has a rather simple solution, letting the player balance it themselves. That is a difficulty slider. Let's take Sekiro as an example. You can come up with all sorts of sliders: in combat game speed, number of deflect frames, number of resurrections, posture related options, gold related options, specifically how fast you drink it, etc. Also a slider for health and damage, both for you and your enemy. I believe this one borders too much on diluting the experience when it likely won't be required if we have the other options that don't. And while I do think that the option should still be there, it should be as a last resort. Try these other options before going with this one, see if it works out. In fact, they should all be ranked when it comes to that, and it should be made clear what dilutes the experience the least or not at all, and what does to an extent and to what extent. Pathologic 2 did that very well, another amazing and also very difficult game that happens to have a great difficulty slider menu. Watch my review of it, by the way. Continuing, Sekiro isn't the only game that can work with such sliders. Dark Souls and Elden Ring, game speed, invincibility frames, health and damage, S2/Crimson tier sliders, etc. Cuphead, game speed, health and damage. Spelunky and Spelunky 2, game speed, bigger heals, perhaps giving you a single shield that protects from an insta-kill. Hollow Knight, game speed, easier parrying, health and damage, faster healing, and there are the games that already have them. Celeste, one of the most famous examples. Game speed, dash assist, infinite stamina, invisibility. I think those last two might be a little too much, but most people will opt for just reducing the game speed. Darkest Dungeon, disabling corpses, party retreats failing, morality debuffs, combat delay penalties, and more. It's not perfect since you're turning off whole mechanics, but it's a great example of how to do communication properly. and Pathologic 2 pretty much has a slider for everything. Obviously, I cannot provide assist mode options that apply to each and every single game out there, since each and every game has different mechanics, but I am yet to see one where it's impossible to design. Either way, FromSoft games absolutely don't fall into that category, and one thing you should never do when making assist mode is allow people to skip whole segments of your game. I can't imagine a single instance wherein it's impossible to reduce the difficulty enough and you would have to skip it instead. It's after all about accessing the challenge, not hopping over it. And as you can possibly start to imagine, these modifications don't take that much effort either. They're not like the traditional easy/normal/hard modes we've grown familiar with. That's something that's both more impractical and more expensive. When arguing against these classic difficulty modes, you can use the argument, if it centers around one difficulty, we can ensure all the attention goes towards making that one difficulty as perfect as it can be, instead of having multiple not as good options. But that doesn't apply with the simple assist mode modifications we laid out. Some argue that Dark Souls and Elden Ring already have great adaptive difficulty with their builds, and I largely agree. Someone might be just fine with one weapon whilst another feels more comfortable with the easier twin blades in Dark Souls 3 for example. It's a great thing. It is however more tailored to and around the average player, people who are not that much below the average or above the average in skill, so it doesn't apply to our case. Again, if it did, this wouldn't be a real problem. Some are simply still not able to do good enough. They also bring up co-op as an example for an easier mode, but that's as far from the intended experience as you can go. I would never tell someone to play Dark Souls like that for the first time. Co-op plays so much differently that it's not even a question. Every single enemy in the games was designed for a single player. Either way, the builds don't apply to Sekiro, nor does the co-op. What about multiplayer though? How would that work? Sure, we can lock the two different difficulty players to the same difficulty, but what about items? It's just not fair to match someone that had an advantage when it comes to that to someone that didn't. Yes, relative difficulty, but obviously many people could use it on their second run to just farm every item and have a PvP character. Besides, someone that had to play on assist mode likely cannot beat one that didn't anyway. This part of it is rather complicated, and as I said at the very beginning, I'm not here to claim I have a solution for it. Frankly, I think it's better to bar people who started with assist mode for multiplayer than to not have assist mode at all if the developers couldn't make them work in their game. That way we may even further make sure only those who need it use it. Again, not perfect is better than not at all, and of course, once more, this does not apply to Sekiro. Finally, going back to the question of assist modes for who, we can also interpret it this way: who simply benefits from this assist mode? I think there are two major answers here. One is old people. Really old people. I actually think lots of them would be able to beat a game like Sekiro if their life depended on it and they had enough time. However, most would absolutely give up, as it could take so long that it wouldn't even be enjoyable at that point. If the difficulty of the game is lowered for someone like that, they would probably take just as much time as you would with standard mode. It would again be the same experience. If I convinced my grandma or grandpa to try out a game like Dark Souls, I would way rather have them start with assist mode and perhaps turn it off if they're having too easy of a time, than have them give up almost immediately because they aren't having fun. This is still about fun though, and I wouldn't say we need an assist mode for old people specifically. We might, but it doesn't really matter because we already have a reason for it as we laid out earlier. It's simply nice that old people can benefit from it. And secondly, we also have the type of people that are very busy, those that cannot make enough time to learn the game and practice. In this case, I would categorically say that we don't need an assist mode for them, but it's nonetheless better if they get to experience the games that we all know and love so much with it, than to not get to experience them at all. Here's a very odd but weirdly perfect analogy I haven't heard any people use when it comes to difficulty sliders, which might help some understand it more. Brightness sliders in horror. A lot of horror games make the inability to see everything around you the scariest part about them. Let's take Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Amnesia will start off by asking you to adjust the brightness so that one of the symbols is barely visible and the other not at all. It's what most games do. Why? Because different people have different eyes. The level of brightness which provides that horrifying experience of barely being able to see the monster in the darkness but still be able to see just a little bit will be lower for one person than for another, or it might be higher. Will some people choose the brighter options even though they don't need them and end up diluting their horror experience? Yes, and it's of course better to have it available for those who actually need it. However, there is one point concerning assist modes which a lot of people seem to throw out over and over, and it's perhaps the one I understand the least and probably the saddest one too: that someone else completing a game with an assist mode somehow takes away from your experience. that your achievements no longer mean anything to you. This is not a multiplayer game. This is not me buying a mount in an MMO whilst you had to grind for it. These are completely separate experiences wherein yours has nothing to do with other people's. Even if we were to disregard the fact that we already defined how difficulty is adaptive and how the other person had more or less the same punishing experience as you, even if we were to assume that someone played Dark Souls or Sekiro or Elden Ring on a classic easy difficulty compared to your standard one, how does that hurt you? Is your own experience not valuable to you at all? This doesn't have much to do with the rest of the argument, since we also touch on how easy it is to make it clear what difficulty you played on. But still, I think this is a very odd mindset present in the From Software community that we should speak about. Your achievements shouldn't depend on other people. I'm sorry, but your gaming accomplishments likely don't mean anything to most people anyway. From Software games are not these Herculean tasks they often get made out to be. A casual gamer likely doesn't understand what beating a FromSoft game even means, and those that do are probably, by virtue of that, not very impressed. It's not about other people. They might not know how it felt when you died dozens of times on that one boss. You do, and you know how great it felt when you finally succeeded. FromSoft games are amazing, and so are difficult games as a whole. Does someone else being able to experience them the same way with an assist mode truly that terrible? Think about that. Hey, thank you for watching this maybe controversial video. I understand that the topic is as such, but still, we should be able to agree to disagree. I made a similar video some time ago, but failed to foresee just how hot the topic was. I now get why I should have picked my words better. Condescension, humoring, and so on. I don't think any of these things are inherently bad, but they are for what I'm going for, which is convincing someone with an extremely strong opinion. Similar topics in the future I aim to approach in the same manner, minimalist, clear-cut, and so on. You might expect a little more of these for the time being, since I'm in college right now, but that doesn't mean the old videos will disappear completely, they'll just take way longer. Anyway, with the assist modes the conversation is at times naturally political, but still, please don't hate me. I'm not going to be responding to many comments, by the way, if any, since I wrote dozens of them in the old video. I'm so over the topic at this point. Anyway, make sure to ring the bell, share, like, comment, watch my other videos and all of that. Check out my rating list if you're interested. I also keep all my video ideas what I'm currently working on there. It's linked on my channel. And as always, subscribe if you like this type of content and want to see more of it. Thanks for sticking around, and I'll see you in the next video.